Welcome to the Cheer Athlete, everyone. Today I have with me Chelsea Muncey from Ohio, and she is from Renegade. And we're going to talk today about sports conditioning and also very important topic, pelvic health for cheerleaders. This comes up. I wanted Chelsea to come on because I remember when I was coaching, a few of my high school kids would report that they were peeing as they landed their tumbling skills, and that's not a normal thing. It happens commonly, but it's not a normal thing, and there are things that we can do to help correct that and make that better so that we have a stronger pelvic floor and health. And I'm going to let Chelsea introduce herself so that we can dive right into this important topic today. So welcome, Chelsea. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation because everyone thinks it's normal, but it really is not a normal thing. And sometimes just a little bit of change can help some of those symptoms. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. I'm Chelsea Muncey. I'm from Miamisburg, Ohio, and I own a gym and a physical therapy clinic where we focus more on pelvic health and orthopedics. And I'm also a nutrition coach and physical therapist assistant. So I've been working in this field for a long time now, especially with athletes. And in our gym, we do more sports performance, CrossFit type training, and then boot camp type strength training with women too. So we've had our business for about 12 years now, and I'm a mom of a toddler, soon to be 4-year-old. So life is crazy, busy, but always in a good way. And so that's just a short story of our business and where I come from. And yeah.
And you're at Renegade, you do a wide variety of ages and athletes. So you said you've had some cheerleaders in there, and you've done youth through adults, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So we start at 10 years old and go all the way up to adults. We've had gymnasts, cheerleaders, soccer players, all the way up to football and baseball in the male side of sports. In the pelvic health world, I've actually worked with young gymnasts who were maybe having leaking or just lower back pain because they're always doing like that extension movement, right? Always overextending with their jumps and movements. So I have worked with some of those gymnasts to try to, what we think of, control the core better. And so most people and most coaches, when they're teaching their athletes to contract their core, they're just teaching them to kind of like squeeze really hard. And they're just telling them, okay, just squeeze your core. And then what happens is usually when they just squeeze their core is that everything that they're doing is putting pressure down into their pelvic floor. And they're not actually contracting what we call the transverse abdominis muscle, or in the Instagram world, you'll see like a TA contraction, right? And that is your deepest inner core muscle. And that muscle is underneath those 6-pack abs that you see. That's your rectus abdominis. And it connects all the way to the lower back. So it's kind of like making like a corset around your stomach. And it is usually turned off, or most people aren't contracting it the right way to help relieve some of that pressure that's going into their pelvic floor. And so if we can learn how to contract that muscle the right way, then athletes can most of the time decrease their back pain and decrease leaking with jumping. But there's more to it. It's not just the TA, right? So we have the intra-abdominal system is what I like to call it. And so your diaphragm is involved in that too. And so what a lot of people don't understand is that actually breathing and the position of their diaphragm can also help with this TA contraction and get everything to coordinate the right way so that we aren't putting pressure down into that pelvic floor or out into our stomach. And it's going all encompassing. So what I like to tell people is like, think of like our rib cage being an umbrella. So when I breathe in, when I inhale, my rib cage is going to expand like an umbrella. And then when I breathe out or exhale, it's actually going to come in. And that's when I'm going to try to kind of pull that belly button also up and in as I pull those ribs down and create that good intra-abdominal pressure, also core contraction with all of our abdominal muscles, not just that rectus muscle that most people is overpowering.
I like the cue for the umbrella. I haven't used that. I kind of think I talk about an inner tube around the waist, but I haven't thought about the umbrella. I like that. That's excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you said in the position of the diaphragm, how do you mean by that?
Yeah, so sometimes our diaphragm can kind of get stuck underneath that rib cage. And so if our ribs are not moving like they should be, and those are stuck, then everything's just kind of here. And so when we go to take that breath, inhale and exhale, we're not getting a big enough breath for that diaphragm to really expand. And so things are just staying tight, and then that pressure is just going right into the middle of our stomach or down into our pelvic floor. And so you can do some manual techniques on yourself where you can go underneath that rib cage, kind of release that diaphragm, move it back and forth, and kind of get it mobile again. And then also do some self rib mobilizations. We teach people to do that and get those ribs moving. So mobility is very important, as well as breath work, to be able to coordinate all of that. And what some people don't know is that sometimes we contract our core so much, or always constantly in like this tight stage in our belly, and you might need more relaxation stuff than actual contracting. And so you can do self massage on your stomach, abdominal massages, and help actually release trigger points in your stomach so that that muscle can fully relax, but also lengthen at the same time. So if our muscles are constantly tight, then we can't fully strengthen them as well as we should be able to. So I like to use the example of like our bicep, because a lot of people know where the bicep is in our arm. If I'm constantly tight, right, and my bicep is super tight and I try to go to strengthen it and I'm doing bicep curls all the time, but I can't fully straighten my arm because it's so tight, then I'm not strengthening that muscle in that full range of motion. So that goes with our core, but also our pelvic floor. A lot of women, cheerleaders, gymnasts, athletes in general, their pelvic floor is super tight. And if a cheerleader or cheer mom's listening to this, most cheerleaders are probably like, what the heck is my pelvic floor? Like, what is she talking about? So for a lack of better words, trying to keep it as PG as possible, but our girl parts down there, right? We have muscles in there, just like we do in the rest of our body. And if those muscles are constantly tight, then we can't fully relax them. And we also can't fully strengthen them at the same time. And then we're not able to hold in our pee when we're doing things like jumping and exercising or lifts and cheerleading. And so mobility and relaxation is also a big part of training that pelvic floor. And so you have to do some deep breathing work. There's a lot of different movements that you can do to relax your pelvic floor. And I think this is where most athletes this is what most athletes are missing, right? Because they go to practice, they do all of their training, they do some cool down stretches, but they're not specifically working on breathing and specific movements to stretch and relax their pelvic floor. And so they're just constantly in that tight state.
Is there, I tend to use a series of like 4 main breathing exercises in different positions. What's the best way to work well, 2 questions. What's the best way to work your breathing? But I also know that the pelvic floor kind of mimics what the diaphragm does as far as like, so you breathe in and your diaphragm comes down and your pelvic floor goes down, and then you breathe in, the pelvic floor goes up and your diaphragm goes up. So they kind of mimic each other. So they're like the top and the bottom part of the core. And so how does the diaphragm, like, are you cueing pelvic floor movement at the same time as breathing movement?
Yeah. So I always like to start with just breath work first and make sure that that person really knows how to inhale through their nose and really expand those ribs when they inhale. And not a lot of people just know how to expand the side of their ribs. They don't think about, oh, I actually have ribs in the front and I have ribs in the back. And so really mastering that inhale and then exhale, just kind of letting it naturally come down. Once we master that breath work, then I start to incorporate the TA contraction with the breath. So as I inhale, like you just mentioned, right, the diaphragm is going to go down, the pelvic floor is going to go down. So that's more of our relaxation phase, which most people have it opposite. They think when they inhale, they should be contracting, and they think when they exhale, they should be relaxing. But when I inhale, everything is relaxing. My ribs are expanding. And then when I exhale, that's actually when I'm doing that pelvic floor contraction. So I like to use the blueberry as an example. Think about pulling up a blueberry with those pelvic floor muscles, and you're trying to let it ride the elevator all the way up to your ribs. And so when I grab that blueberry, I'm pulling that belly button also kind of up and in at the same time, but then my ribs are coming in too, right? To create that good core contraction. And that's as I exhale. So we really start very basic with the breathing. And then it takes a while to get what we call that neuromuscular connection between my brain, my diaphragm, my core, and my pelvic floor. And so most people are like, wow, this is really, really hard. And I'm like, yes, but we have to do it multiple times a day to start getting that connection. And usually most people will start on their back with this breathing technique, but we're not always on our backs, especially cheerleaders and athletes. So I try to cue not only on our backs, but also like on our hands and knees, and the quadruped position is what we call it. And then in standing. So I'm like, practice this in all three positions. You're usually in all three positions at some point during the day, when you're brushing your teeth, when you're getting ready, doing your hair, you know, when you're warming up. So we try to use that breath work in all different positions. Now, when, let's say they're done with practice and they need to relax their pelvic floor, there's like 5 different stretches that I love. And I call it the wall series stretches, where you're doing different positions with your feet up on the wall. And it's putting your pelvic floor and your legs in different positions to help relax that pelvic floor. And as they are doing those stretches, we practice our diaphragmatic breathing. So that's no contracting with our core. It's just breathing in through your nose and then out through your mouth, like you're blowing out candles. I like to use that as an example. And really just letting those ribs expand as you inhale, and think about, you know, feeling that on the floor in the backside, and then just exhale. And doing that for like a minute to 10 breaths with putting our feet in different positions on the wall.
It can sound very complicated. And I think, you know, and people will frequently say to me, like, if I have them work on breathing, you know, what, you know, because I won't let them move past some of the basic breathing things to get into harder exercises, or, you know, in their words, until they can efficiently, and they're looking more efficient and can control that in various positions. And it seems very simple. They're like, why am I just doing the simple exercise? But it's not. It's a really complicated exercise, and huge in being able to progress and carry on and to carry that over. Because like you said, if you can't breathe on the floor, then how are you going to breathe when you're, you know, 2.5 people high, or you're holding 2.5 people on top of you, you know, and being able to control that.
Yeah. And with a lot of athletes, they tend to hold their breath. And so just doing a little bit of breath work and cueing them that when they're doing those explosive movements, instead of holding your breath, let's do a quick exhale, inhale, exhale before I jump. And that exhale there, even if you're still working on connecting your core and your breath together, and exhale actually automatically does just a little bit of a TA and pelvic floor contraction automatically. Your body just kind of automatically does that. And so sometimes with athletes, it's just cueing them to exhale on those explosive movements. And they're like, wow, that actually helped a lot. And so sometimes it's just a little cue like that. And then cueing them to try to get their rib cage down. So like I said, cheerleaders and gymnasts, they're always in that hyper extensive position in their lower back. And then that flares their ribs up. And so then that puts our core and pelvic floor, all that pressure just going straight down into our core and pelvic floor. And then that causes leaking too. So cueing them to try to get those ribs down with their breath as they're doing their jumps and flips and things like that.
So is it like when someone lands a tumble pass, or they come out of stunt and they land hard and they leak that little bit, is that typically, and then everybody's different, but because they are in that hyperextended position and that pressure's being pushed through the pelvic floor. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with the pelvic floor. It's just that they're not having that control. Is that what that?
Yeah. So they're not having control, and just the position of their body is causing that leaking. And so it could just be one little fix where they're fixing their rib cage and their landing technique and their movement patterns. And then just add a little bit of breathing in there where they're not holding their breath when they're landing. And then they could be good. So it's not necessarily a pelvic floor issue, where a lot of people think like, oh, I'm leaking, but so maybe I do have an issue. But
Right.
Also, along with movement, I was just thinking of this. Cheerleaders wear high-waisted skirts sometimes, right? They're kind of high. I would think, right? So if their cheerleading skirt is super tight, guess what? That's also squeezing things in, and that could cause leaking too. And so I know there's no option, right? Because that's usually how the cheerleading skirt, but maybe having that skirt just a little bit looser and not so tight. And then, the shirts are kind of right over the rib cage too.
Yeah.
So could that be an issue as well?
Yeah, that didn't think of that either. I definitely think like our sports bras and the crop tops, they come right at the base of the rib cage, and so you hope that they fit good and that you have some, they're snug enough to not be falling all over the place or falling out, but they're loose enough that you can actually get some expansion and breathing in them and mobility with them. That will definitely feed into that.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed for myself, certain leggings that I wear, if they are super tight, not super tight, even just a little bit tighter than what maybe my normal leggings are, and I'm doing any double unders or jumping stuff, and I'm like, wait a second, what in the world? Like, why did I just leak? Like, what? I'm a pelvic health therapist. What's going on? Like, I thought I, had this down, and then I started connecting it, and it was the same pair of leggings every time. And I'm like, what? It could be that. And then honestly, I haven't worn those leggings for any jumping activities. And the next time I didn't have any issues, and it was a very similar workout. So I was like, But also, a lot of women don't realize, especially younger females, their cycle can have a play into their leaking too. So like right before you're about to start menstruating and during that menstruating, there's a lot of inflammation and stuff going on down there. And you could have leaking during your cycle too. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a pelvic floor issue.
So it can be normal. Is there a way, I think, is there a way to control that when you have the hormonal changes? Like, there's nothing we can really do about that.
Yeah, there's nothing you can really do, but working on the things that we talked about with your breathing and getting good at contracting that core with your breath can help eliminate some of those leaking issues during that cycle. And so that's why it's very important to do that stuff, so that when you are menstruating, you don't have a choice. If you have a meet during your cycle, like, you have to keep going, right? So as long as you are doing the work before, hopefully it will decrease the amount of leaking that maybe you've had. And I know some people are probably thinking like, well, then what is how do I know if this is normal or not? And so what I tell people is, when you're jumping, are you constantly leaking? Do you feel like you have to wear a pad every time you jump or do practice? Do you have, pain with inserting a tampon? If your young females are using tampon usage, like, that's not normal. And so that's when I would be like, okay, maybe you need to go see a pelvic health therapist. And so they can evaluate internally what your pelvic floor muscles are actually doing. And maybe they're just super tight and we need to do some myofascial releases on those pelvic floor muscles, and then show you some wall stretches and breathing techniques to do to get that relaxation, so that then you can start fully strengthening those muscles.
That's great advice. Like, once in a while it happens and it's not a consistent thing. Work on some breathing, learn how to do some efficient breathing. Maybe you don't need any hands-on treatment or anything, but in different cases, you might need hands-on treatment. And that's, when you're going to take your take your child to, or yourself to a pelvic health therapist and really get evaluated. I think the other piece, when it comes to menstruation, like, something I wish I had known earlier, like, the breathing work will also help. I mean, that's a big part of it, is learning how to relax the muscles around. And I think it would help a lot with cramps and, just generally getting through the cycle, like learning how to breathe and let things relax. Because when we just tense everything up, it just puts everything into that, makes everything spasm, for lack of a better word. But, and so there are ways to control that naturally. I mean, I would pop Advil all the time when Advil got invented, but, but I think some of that breath work, training it, can help your body, because it's women in general, but cheerleaders, we're constantly high stress, and we're like, everything we do is like go, go, go. And the high intensity work that you're doing, and if you don't find that quiet time to balance your nervous system, it just perpetuates itself, and it will come out in symptoms like cramps or leaking and all of that. So
yes, exactly. And learning how to use that breath work just to decrease that stress is going to be very valuable your entire life. And, no one taught us that as a kid. Like, oh, just go do some breath work, lay down. I know one of my track coaches actually had me do that one time, some visualization, because I was having really bad cramps right before a track meet one time, and I had to do long jump. So I was, jumping. And she had me do that. And I still remember that to this day. And I was in 8th grade by that time. No one had taught me that until that moment. And so I think that breath work and just visualization of like being on a beach and trying to relax your body is very important for young athletes. Even if it's not during competition or practice, whatever you're going through in your life, today's world, there's a lot that young people have to deal with social media and just a lot of stuff. And so just lying down and taking some time for yourself is very important.
Yeah.
Along with this relaxation and contracting the pelvic floor, I think a lot of gymnasts and cheerleaders also don't get enough strength training. And so every time they jump, all of that pressure is also going into their joints, mostly, and their knees, their hips, their back. And so then they get a lot of back pain. And so I think it's very important that cheerleaders have some type of strength training program to strengthen their glutes in their lower body, but also their core and upper body as well. That's all important. But the glutes in the lower body can help relieve some of that pressure into those joints and alleviate any pain or future pain that they might get from the repetitive jumping.
And that all ties into, it's a all-inclusive program, like your hip muscles attach into your pelvic floor and right
Sure.
at like and the hip rotators, which cheerleaders always want to open their hips up and open their hips up. But sometimes you might need to strengthen them to be able to have better have better jumps, but also helping along the pelvic floor. And it just all ties in together in including that good routine. I wanted to touch briefly on, because I think this can be a touchy subject. I don't think that a lot of, I don't think it like, kids don't go home and be like, hey, mom, I leaked in practice today. Or they don't, like, I just overheard my cheerleaders talking, and so coaches, you can address it indirectly without necessarily being, because it's a touchy subject. You don't go to practice with 14-year-olds and talk about pelvic floor. But moms, you need to address, what's happening, make sure that, where your kid's at. So how do you have that conversation as a coach, or how do you address it, in a safe way?
Yeah, that is a great question. I mean, as a female coach, it's probably not as hard to address. I know for me, with our athletes in here, a lot of the female athletes are more apt to opening up to me about things. And so I just try to really make it known, like, hey, it's okay if you have this issue. If you want to talk about it, you don't have to bring it up, in the group here, but I am here. You can bring me aside. You can email me, you can message me, and we can come up with a plan to help you. But just know, ladies, that this is not always normal, and it's okay, but you don't have to open up in front of the group. And I think it's very important for coaches to kind of address that. But a lot of coaches don't know themselves. A lot of coaches are moms who've had kids, and they don't even know, or they're embarrassed themselves to admit that they have it. And so I think that's a really hard area. I'm not a cheer coach, but yeah, so I think it's just educating more coaches, cheer coaches and moms out there to educate their daughters on, hey, look, this doesn't have to be you. And I'm actually going to go and do a program myself so that I can learn and take it back to these cheerleaders and teach them how to contract their core the right way and how to breathe when they're jumping and things like that.
I think the key, have a conversation, like as a coach, maybe you have it with the parents so that they know that you're on the same page. And parents ask your cheerleaders, and encourage them. Same thing, like, okay, maybe you don't need to talk a lot about it, but let's figure it out and see what's going on. Because I think there's a lot of bad stuff happening in the cheer world. And it's not everybody, and not all coaches are bad, but and we hope that they have the best interest for your kids. And so feeling comfortable with your coach, talking to them, coaches feeling comfortable talking to the parents, and vice versa, so that it's a team process in the same. And that's whether it's pelvic health or strengthening and in general, any injury in general too. So
yeah, and so I think it's a more of like, how do we spread this word to more coaches, and how do we get them to incorporate things in their programs to work on this, and not even have to really openly say, hey, this is actually going to help you from leaking, jumping, pelvic floor, because men have issues with pelvic floor too. Right. And so it could go with all coaches working on breath work after practice or before practice, working on certain movements to help activate, but also strengthen our glutes before we're doing different types of movements to help decrease some of that leaking or whatever it is that we're having with that pelvic floor, and just educating themselves on things that they can do to help these athletes.
Key takeaways. So what do you have going on? Do you have anything that you're working on right now in getting out to people?
Yeah, actually working on some strength programs, but also courses to help with this stuff. So I know it's not always, pelvic floor is not always available.
Yeah.
There's wait list, insurance doesn't cover it. Some people just can't afford to pay out of pocket for a pelvic floor. And then we will all live very busy lives. And so I'm working on some online programs to educate people about this. And, videos on how to do some of these movements that we talked a bit about, how to do the breath work, how to incorporate it all. And then also a strength program, to a 6-week strength program to work on the pelvic floor, core, and lower body. So more of like an accessory type program to strengthen those muscles, but also relax. So there's also, it has a warm up, a activation phase, a strength, and then a cool down. All 4 of those things to add into your program to help try to decrease some of those symptoms that you're having.
Awesome. I can't wait to learn more about it and hear and, see how it goes.
I'm excited for it.
Good stuff. Because I think a lot of people need all of that, so how can, if people want to reach you, how can people reach you, and where are you at?
Yeah. So I'm on social media. My personal Instagram is at Chelsea Muncey 12. I also have at Renegade PT Ohio. I'm also on Facebook and starting to be on TikTok. So you can look at Chelsea Muncey on TikTok. And then you can just email me too. So send me an email at chelsea@renegade.family, and then direct message me on Instagram too.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that's all listed in the show notes. Check out Chelsea's information and watch for those programs to come up, because it's a great way to get yourself, if you're not sure, it's a great place to start the conversation and just learn the basics, and then take it from there. If you need further, I'm sure Chelsea can direct you. And if that's enough, then that's great. So I'm sure it's going to be awesome information to learn. So.
Yeah. I also do free consultations. So they can find that in my link on my Instagram, and we can talk about whatever issues they're having.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think this is a big topic that we don't talk enough about. And I appreciate being here. Both the strength and conditioning, and especially the pelvic floor and the relaxation, that is just as important as in it. So thanks so much, Chelsea, for being here. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Everybody, that concludes today's episode of The Cheer Athlete. Don't forget, when in doubt, breathe it out, just like Chelsea said, and take life one step at a time. And as my friend Drew Kelleher said, you are responsible for your own vibes. Have a great day.